So what is needed in Kenya today is stability. Kabila langu ni Kenya.
He was once dismissed as nothing more than a passing cloud.
Na asante, salimia jamii yako na wote.
A fleeting figure destined to vanish without leaving a mark.
And you see that time also, not all the college supported him.
Niweke maneno yao, vitendo vyao, matakwa yao mbele.
Moi will not go to the Rift Valley without the express permission from the provincial commissioner, Isaiah Matenga then. And you are vice president.
But when Daniel Moi rose to the presidency in 1978, he shattered every doubt.
So one of the things he did is to make sure that he recruited a lot of KANU chairmen. So he got to every place, the KANU chairman is a Moi person.
A man and a character who holds both providential luck and marginalization by the leaders.
Thank you. For 24 years, Moi's presence loomed over Kenya, his grip firm, his gaze ever watchful. How did a humble school teacher ascend to the pinnacle of power, becoming Kenya's longest serving president?
Kwa sababu mimi nasema greatness of a nation is not its size or population, it is greatness of the heart. Mkumbukeni wale ambao tunajua hawana.
To some, he was the great stabilizer, a steady hand that held the nation together through storms of uncertainty. To others, he was a shadow of fear, an autocrat who silenced voices, crushed opposition, and ruled through intimidation. This is the story of Daniel Arap Moi, the man once destined for obscurity, yet who reigned longer than any other in Kenya's history.
Ni wajibu wetu kama iko shida kwa shule fulani, tufanye harambee. Wanaeleza uvumi, hata anasema Moi mgonjwa wapi, kuja hapa. 50,000 kwa mguu wa mkoa wa elimu. I love Kenyans. I know they respect me, they help me. Mimi, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya.
At over 6 feet tall, Daniel Arap Moi carried himself with a deliberate, upright stride.
You interacted with him. I had a chance to interact with him when he was president and when he was out. He's such a sophisticated man. You leave his office or his house thinking that he's the only gentleman still standing.
Clad in dark, finely tailored suits, crisp white shirts, and perfectly knotted ties, he radiated composure and authority. For 24 years, his presence became inseparable from his signature look. Suits accented at times by a single red rose on his lapel and the ceremonial rungu firmly in hand.
Up to the time he went to the grave, he stood straight. He had his white teeth intact. Hello? Until he started having more head than hair, like I'm doing, you know, he had his nice black hair. You get that? Which was graying graciously at some point. And he could march like a policeman who missed a chance to go to the training. He's the only Kenyan president who will actually march with the beat of the band.
Together, they created an unmistakable image of command and reverence.
Na mnauliza nyinyi nyote kukaa na mimi tuende barabara yetu tukiwa KANU pamoja.
Moi was a very dominant president and he literally controlled KANU. People were scared of speaking out.
But Moi's story did not begin in the corridors of power. It began far away in the rugged hills of Baringo.
When all is said and done, Moi was a creator and a creation of his times.
In the quiet village of Kurengo, such a location, he was born on September 2nd, 1924, at a time when Kenya was still under British colonial rule. He was the fifth child of Gabon, the senior wife of Kimoi Arap Chebii. His name, Toroitich, welcome home the cattle, reflected the central role of livestock in his Tugen community. Some say the name Moi evolved from Kimoi, his father's name, Kimoi Arap Chebii, a herdsman of the Soti clan that settled among the Tugen Hills. When his father passed in 1928, Moi was only 4 years old. It was his elder brother Tuitok who became his guardian. Like countless boys of his generation, Moi spent his childhood tending the family's herds, but Tuitok recognized something more in him and sent the young boy to school.
The big brother becomes the father, and the others are looking up to him. So it was very good of the big brother to do the right thing. The decision to take the young man to school was a very wise one. And the young man wanted to be in school.
That single decision will chart the course of Moi's destiny.
And the schools, not many people are going to school.
He's born at a time the Kenyan Africans were going through some kind of transition. Kenya was increasingly getting in contact with the outside world. The area where Moi emerges had started witnessing caravan merchants trespassing from the coast, through that area. And believe you me, a town called Ridamaravin is one of the oldest towns, if not in Kenya, in the Rift Valley. On the heels of the caravan merchants were, of course, Christian missionaries who were the vanguards of imperial designs in Kenya. The flag followed the cross. The political administrators followed the missionaries. The missionaries literally made the way for the politicians and administrators of colonialism.
In 1934, a young boy set foot in the newly founded African Inland Mission School in Kabartonjo, an institution that will soon relocate to Kapsabet.
Moi begins his life as a traditional boy, a herds boy for his father's goats. That area normally is good for keeping goats. And also started to begin to have a taste of colonial modernity in the form of Christianity and some kind of education.
Within its walls, he shone with rare brilliance. A natural leader and gifted athlete, he rose to become both prefect and captain of the football team.
That now left him at the mercy of seeing Christian missionaries as more helpers than just trying to change him and take him to heaven. That is how Moi started getting an education and friendship of the African inland Christian missionaries. He goes to school, gets an education, relocates to Kapsabet. That's why Kapsabet has produced the highest number of presidents in this country. I don't know whether you know that. Today, Kapsabet High School, the boys' high school, that is where Moi used to be. It has produced the 2 presidents and the 2 vice presidents, Moi himself and Dr. William Kipchirchir Ruto.
In the 1930s, you know, young people going to school and they stand out. The son of so-and-so is in this class or is among these people. So Moi was unique as a young man because he went to school. When some of his age mates were maybe running after cattle or doing whatever it is that they were doing, or looking tough with some other things.
Being warriors.
Yeah,
warriors.
He went to school and therefore he stood out.
By 1946, chalk and chalkboard became his tools of service. And in 1949, after a rigorous short course at Kagumo Teachers College, he was promoted to the rank of P2, returning to Tambach to inspire anew.
He turned out not to be a bad teacher. And he was a good calculator.
You know, that was out of this world. Because of the colonial architecture, there is the extent to which an African could rise. And they were assistant teachers. Actually, they were not full teachers. You know, in the early 20s and the early, even the 30s, even up to the 40s, there was something called bush schools. Samustun, literally. And then there were sector schools. These sector schools were an improvement of bush schools. You know, that's now when you went to secondary schools. Fundamentally, if you look at that narrative, Moi was a creation of his environment. These are not choices that he really made, but this is an environment that has beginning trappings of Christianity, Western education, Christian converts. You get that? You know, new schools coming in. Moi had nothing to do with the establishment of Kapsabet or the early schools that he went to. And he ended up in Tengecha colleges. You know, those are, you know, environments that were created by a colonial situation and gave African opportunities for upward mobility, however slow it was.
When he was growing up, who is it that had the power? The missionaries, eh? They ran the schools, eh? And the churches, eh? And even hospitals, eh? So he imbibed. So I said that he knew which side of the bread is buttered. Yeah. And it was very well buttered on the missionary side, eh?
He taught with devotion at Tambach until 1955, when the course of his life shifted forever. Called forth by history, he was elected to the Legislative Council as Rift Valley's African voice, stepping onto the grand stage of politics with courage and conviction.
The missionaries were key in you know, guiding the colonial government of what needed to be done or what needed not to be done. You could imagine until they elect an African to the Legislative Council in 1948, Africans in the LegCo, the short form of the Legislative Council, were represented by a missionary. That tells you that Christianity and imperialism were one and the same thing, were actually two sides of the same coin.
Well, he did not know that the opportunity was going to arise when it arose. But as to whether he had ambitions, that's a different matter. It's plausible. Because he turned out to be a friend of Moses Mudavadi, the father of Wycliffe, yeah. Who was an education officer in those areas at the time. So as an education officer, he went around and he knew his teachers, eh? And he knew the ones that are seemingly looking good, eh? And especially if they are unique, not being many, eh? And how many Tugans were teachers at that time.
Moi emerges as the favorite of the missionaries. And nobody has said this, but I will believe, other than the political dynamics, other than the idea that he had the right thing at the right place, he also had the right connections, particularly with the Christian missionaries. Moi is a friend, until he died, he was a friend of the Penat family, the people who Kapranet is named after.
Now, what happened in 1955? There was another person who represented the Africans in that region. Yeah. I think his name was Tamen or something like that. I think he was a Maasai. And there were rumors that he liked his drink. And, that sometimes he probably would misbehave when he had enjoyed. And so the theory or the rumor was that the colonial government became unhappy with him. So he needed to be changed to get a sober African, somebody who is likely to say good things and not embarrass the logical. And because there was need to change, and Mudavadi being a very influential native as an education officer, so he gets a chance to recommend people. So he recommends this fellow who might have been his friend.
The factor that very few people have talked about is his influence within the Christian and missionary setup that clearly showed him as less harmful than many others who were more educated probably than him. Dr. Taita Towet, although slightly younger, and many others were there. You get that? Yeah. So Moi was seen as harmless, very obedient, and very subservient to the demands of colonial modernity. If you see him in those days, he's among the very few people, very nicely cut suit. Yeah. And he had the stature, tall, dark, and handsome. That was His Excellency. He's the only leader who only married one wife, officially, and died with one wife, officially. And I'm using the word officially very strongly. Yes, don't ask me why. Yes. So in fact, look at people of his generation. They were serious polygamists.
He was appointed in 1955. But in the election of 1957, he was elected. Now, in that election, and Mudavadi was one of the registrars of the voters. So he went to everywhere in the Rift Valley, telling people, giving people votes, and telling them to vote for Tory teacher. And they are wondering, well, what is this? I said, just take it and go and vote for Tory teacher.
Do Tory teach.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't know even who a Tory teach was.
No, I just told vote for Tory teach.
So Mudavadi had a lot of influence.
Yeah, he was in charge of the whole province in terms of education.
It is true that Moi had a close bond with the British. They had identified him earlier, partially because of an image that he had of an easily marriable character that you can turn into what you want. Very obedient, very subservient. Somebody very a strict Christian, a stickler to time.
So the people who were allowed to vote at that time were people who were pro-British?
To get a vote in itself, especially in the Kikuyu zone, you had to prove that you had campaigned against the Mau Mau in order to get a vote. So you can imagine that those who got votes were home guys, most of them.
Those who were home.
And they were getting more than one vote, 2 or 3 depending on your status. If for any reason you should be suspected of sympathizing with the Mau Mau or those other people, no vote for you. You cannot be a candidate, and you cannot be a candidate or a voter.
As the winds of independence swept across Kenya, unity gave way to political fault lines. The Kenya African National Union, KANU, under the charismatic Jomo Kenyatta, rose to dominate the stage. But Daniel Arap Moi and others envisioned a different future. In 1960, Moi helped found the Kenya African Democratic Union, KADU.
The idea that the dominant ethnic groups will not be good for the country, the Kikuyu and the Luo alliance, was a British idea. It was actually being driven by the white settlers who wanted to maintain their interests in the country.
The settlers who had been told their future is doomed as rulers rebaptized themselves as a small white tribe. So they were willing to say they are now a tribe. Eh? A small one, eh?
A small minority.
Yeah.
And for them, Jaramogi from the Luo community and Kenyatta from the Kikuyu community could be too dangerous if they are not tamed.
So they went around looking for other small tribes to gang up against what was to be portrayed as the two big bad tribes.
This is the Luo.
Because of Jaramogi and Boya.
Then Kikuyu.
Because of the Mau Mau War. So these are the bad ones. Eh? The rest are good people.
They found these two leaders at the top, Kenyatta and Jaramogi. One was rumored to have inclinations to the east, the socialist. Kenyatta was also accused of having visited Russia when he was. But they also saw credentials of him being a pragmatist in Kenyatta. They said, well, that way will be a lesser evil. But Moi is no evil for us. So let's support him. Let's form KADU.
And somehow they managed to convince a lot of some interesting leaders. Eh? So Moi quit being in KANU and he went to become chairman of KADU. Ngala quit. I think his post was maybe treasurer or something like that, but a high position. Eh? And he went to become the leader of KADU. Eh? Muliro, whatever. And you know, the Luya are very many. Eh?
Second in population.
Yeah, so how they were convinced that they are small is another matter.
What the British needed is somebody with enough empty mind and enough loyalty and enough subservience to play their game. And in that cycle, there was none other than Dan.
And in terms of logic, it was a very good logic in hindsight. Eh? Because the idea was when the elections come and you have all these others uniting against these two, there's no way they can win. No way can Luos and the Kikuyus win when everybody else is against them. No way.
At its heart was Majimbo, a federal vision of government, one that promised regional autonomy and a safeguard against the marginalization of any community.
That the constitution has not yet been implemented, and they are discussing independence constitution. How on earth that an internal self-government constitution is which is being agreed, is set aside and wanting to implement another constitution, a different constitution?
Now, when the elections were held in February 1961, something came out very clearly. Because the voters elected KANU across the board, and that was a shock. What the voters knew KANU to be the one fighting for independence. And KADU appeared like a puppet of the settlers. The KANU people made a mistake because they had been told no Kenyatta and they were there talking about what? Kenyatta. Eh? So you want Kenyatta out. We are not going to form a government unless Kenyatta is out. So they can say, you people, what? Okay, you wait. Ngala, do you want to run something? So what people talk about Ngala's government, that's how it came up, because the Kanu people refused to form government. And became a big lesson,
From the security viewpoint, I think that Jomo Kenyatta's return to political life in Kenya at the present time would be a disaster. I repeat and confirm that in my view, Jomo Kenyatta's release would be at present a danger to security. The decision is mine. By this statement, I wish to make it clear that accordingly he will remain under restriction.
On August the 14th, 1961, Kenyatta came home.
So many people came because the news just spread out like wildfire. And Mzee tried to speak to them. And I remember his first few words. He said, I am very happy to be back with you, my people.
When do you want independence for Kenya?
Today.
What means are you ready to adopt to achieve independence?
Constitutional means.
And do you condemn Mau Mau violence and oath-taking?
Well, I have never approved of any violence at all. My leadership has not been to darkness and death, but to light and prosperity.
We must show the world that some of them has been wrong, that some of them have misunderstood us, and it's only by our action they will know that we mean business. Brothers, I think I have spoken enough in this language. It is not my wish that I should be speaking to you in a foreign, and for that matter, in colonialistic language.
The 1960s opened with high-stakes negotiations thousands of miles away. At the Lancaster House conferences in London, Kenya's destiny was debated and defined. Moi stood there representing KADU, pressing for African rights, access to fertile lands once locked away by European settlers, and a stronger African hand in shaping the nation's governance. By 1961, his influence was unmistakable. As KADU's parliamentary secretary and later as minister in the pre-independence coalition, Moi's star continued to rise.
Now, in the second Lancaster House Conference in 1962, again, the people who are supposed to participate should be leaders who are recognized by being in the legico. Kenyatta had come out of jail. He had been released. None of the political prisoners was a member of the Legislative Council, and therefore they could not attend. Now, the people in KANU, many of them had committed or promised that when Kenyatta comes out, we shall step down for him. It turns out that we are not very interested in honoring the pledges. Except one person, Kariuki Njiri, the son of Chief Kariuki Njiri. So he's stepping down so that Kenyatta can become an MP. A member of the legislature. So that's how Kenyatta ended up participating in the 1962 Lancaster Conference. And in that conference, KANU as an organ was a minority. The British were against them. The colonial government in Kenya was against them. KADU, and then all the other groups there. So it was a minority. And the British government was determined to impose the pet subject that had come up, Majimbo. So as much as they argued, they were not being listened to on the problem with Majimbo. So it was imposed.
The function of the conference is not, of course, to take decisions about the future of Kenya. That is a responsibility which ultimately rests with Her Majesty's government as a whole. And it is my duty as Secretary of State to make recommendations and give advice to my colleagues about what should be done. We shall, in effect, be discussing the foundations which must be laid for eventual self-government.
Don't let it happen to Dennis! Don't let what happened to me yesterday happen to Dennis!
May 1963, the last elections under British rule. KANU swept the polls, carrying Kenya into independence. On December 12th, 1963, after the final Lancaster House Conference, the flag of a new nation was hoisted. Jomo Kenyatta became Prime Minister, head of government, under a constitution that still placed Queen Elizabeth as head of state. A year later, Kenya declared itself a republic. Kenyatta assumed the presidency. Uniting the roles of head of state and government. But the political ground shifted once more. In 1964, KADU dissolved into KANU. Moi too joined the fold, aligning with Kenyatta's government. The merger, encouraged by British hands, sought to weaken the growing influence of Oginga Odinga in the fragile young republic.
When Kenyatta comes in, and the British begin to realize he's dancing to the tune of the West. After all, he was not very evil. Kenyatta, knew good life when one appeared. Yeah. And the only problem he had with the colonialists is because they discriminated against him. When he was in control, sitting in the governor's mansion, where the governor used to sit, and walking around and everybody saluting and calling him a muse, things were okay. His problem is that when he was not in charge and when he was discriminated. So he became a good darling of Washington and London. That's why Kenya became the only country that tacitly supported apartheid, with Njonjo, with his connections with South Africa, to the juggling of the frontline states like Tanzania, Nyerere, the firebrand against apartheid and against the capitalists.
Kwa Matungi, Chris Yokanu, Machakos, nchi yako. Kenyatta, Kenyatta.
Ni kazi ya kila mwananchi kuinua nchi yetu, na serikali yenu tukufu itajaribu iwezavyo kuwasaidisha wananchi.
With KANU out of the way, the differences within KANU came up. And the issue was the direction that the country should take now that it is independent. That's what the difference was.
Jaramogi became a victim of the ideological war of East-West during the Cold War.
Jaramogi and Murumbi and others were thinking we should balance up this a little bit. But Kenyatta saying, no, we need to be with the West. And the first ambassadors and high commissioners that were appointed, there was that attempted balance. Because you had three going to the West, Bonn, London, and New York. Then on the other side you have Moscow, Beijing, and Cairo. Balance.
This powerful nation, the Western countries were led by the Americans, and the Eastern countries by the Soviet Union, and now China, sort of forced the world to be in two groups, so you had to be with one or the other. But Kenya had declared that we were non-aligned, and those are the instructions for us as ambassadors. That's what we explained. But meanwhile, their ambassadors were busy in the host capitals. Like here, we had a very active American ambassador called William Atwood. Very, very busy. They are busy working on our politicians, on our ministers, you know. So they created a local conflict. The Chinese were also very active. The Russians were very active. So instead of KANU remaining solid, now the president found himself being supported by two groups that were equally strong. So Tom Mboya came to not be known, and even the parliament became divided.
Those same colonial, forces, but now together with people from within KANU and outside KANU.
But when it came to the serious reality, which was enunciated properly in session of paper number 10 of 1965, which Kenyatta simply asked Mboya and company to come up with a document. But some people were talking about socialism all the time, so call it socialism. But it had nothing to do with socialism. So they came up with Mboya, Kibaki, and an American professor called Edwards from Rice University. They helped craft a document which essentially put Kenya in the Western camp and made it clear that Kenya was a capitalist country. Kenyatta told people to stop talking about socialism. They did not. They continued. And it became then the next thing that comes into the picture very well is essentially the politics of Kenyatta's death. In the West and other The question is, who would succeed? Is it Mboya or is it Odinga? And both of them were, in case the guy goes, who takes over?
And if you look at the portfolio Jaramogi had at that time of independence, it was a very powerful portfolio he had. He was in charge of home affairs, which meant what is now internal security. And of course, the chemistry between the two leaders, you know, both from Kenyatta's perspective and from Jaramogi's perspective, things were going to fall naturally into play.
If you look at the 1964 Republican Constitution on the question of succession, it made it clear that if it happens, there is a vacancy, the sitting vice president will not automatically ascend to the position. It will depend on the persuasion in the cabinet and in parliament. And who was to be the vice president? Jaramogi. That meant Jaramogi is out, in case it happens. And who was likely to be the one? Well, the person who could persuade people at the language and all those things was Mboya, and seemed to have a little money, extra. So that Mboya, he was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs, so he crafted the thing for himself. And that's the way it was. Now, when Jaramogi resigned in 1966, after being pushed, Mboya actually said we pushed him. So Jaramogi was saying, I've resigned on principle. And Mboya said, the guy was pushing. The question was, who then replaces Jaramogi? Kenyatta settled on another prima donna, Murumbi.
Murumbi comes in more because of his weaknesses as opposed to his strengths. Murumbi was kind of a child of nobody knew. He was a child of a Muindi, an Indian, and a Maasai lady. But clearly, he didn't have traceable origins. You cannot associate him. He tried to play Maasai, Gagata, even went both land, which I'm told now the president has taken over, in Narok. But it didn't work. He ended up being buried here at a cemetery in Pangani. Otherwise, he could have buried, if he was true Maasai, he could have buried, his soul could be resting in his homeland. That is actually the weakness that qualified him, because Kenyatta did not need another Jaramogi who has a strong community supporting, literally fanatical about him. That was a threat.
And Murumbi did not last 1 year. Remember, he had those ideas that Mau Mau was not a very bad thing, and as Minister of Foreign, you'd say you base your foreign policy on the Mau Mau legacy. Not the sort of thing that the West wants to hear. Particularly the Western pointman in the government, one of the pointmen called Charles Njonjo. He didn't like Joe very much. So within a year, Murumbi had resigned, or pushed, whichever sounds better. And when he was leaving, he wrote a letter of resignation, a very nice letter, polite like a gentleman. And Kenyatta, as a gentleman, replied to him in a very nice way. How he got to me. But the message is, okay, I accept your resignation reluctantly. And there was Njonjo on the sideline telling Joe, you are finished, Joe, you are finished. So there was a vacancy for the what? For the vice president.
To succeed Murumbi, they needed another weak person. And the weaknesses they were looking for is weaknesses of character and weaknesses of community of origin.
And then who is in a position to take over the job? Moi.
And Moi qualified in both. Tugen. In fact, many people do not, even up to today, you tell them Tugen, they know Kalenjin. Yeah. But Kalenjin is this Moba's thing.
Tangu za makamu wa rais, na kwa wakati wote nitamshauri kwa hekima na uaminifu rais.
They say that Njonjo had